My name is Vincent. For 18 years, my job title was Crisis Manager. It's not a role you apply for, it's a role you become. You become the guy who gets the 3 a.m. call when a factory in Malaysia floods. You become the calm voice on a conference call when a C-suite executive is caught in a scandal. You become the architect of order in a world that thrives on chaos. My world was a fortress of contingency plans, a library of protocols for every imaginable corporate disaster. I was the company's immune system, and for 18 years I kept it healthy. Then came Sabrina. She arrived with the kind of polished, frictionless confidence that only a top-tier MBA program and zero real-world failures can produce. She saw the company not as a living organism, but as a spreadsheet. Every department, every employee, every process was a cell that was either generating revenue or a cost to be cut. I apparently was a cost. I remember the meeting. It wasn't in my office, a space cluttered with whiteboards, risk matrix charts, and the comforting scent of old paper and ozone from the printers. No, it was in one of her sterile, glass-walled conference rooms on the executive floor. Everything was white and chrome, a room designed to make you feel temporary. She sat across a table so vast and empty it felt like a border between nations. Next to her, a nervous-looking man from Human Resources, Mark, fidgeted with a tablet, avoiding my eyes. Sabrina smiled a smile that didn't involve her eyes. It was a facial arrangement, nothing more. "Vincent," she began, her voice crisp and devoid of any real warmth, "we're moving the company in a new, more streamlined direction. We're focusing on proactive growth, not reactive management." She paused, letting the jargon hang in the air like cheap air freshener. She believed it made her sound intelligent. It just made her sound like every other executive who'd read the same 3 business books. "And in this new paradigm," she continued, "we feel that certain legacy roles are no longer aligned with our forward-facing strategy." Mark from HR flinched. He knew. I knew. I'd seen this play out 100 times, usually with me in the room advising the CEO on how to handle the fallout. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. She finally got to the point. A good company, Vincent, shouldn't need a crisis manager. It was delivered with such unshakable, unearned certainty. It was the thesis statement of her entire worldview. If you build the car right, you don't need a mechanic. If you design the ship perfectly, you don't need lifeboats. It was the kind of dangerous, beautiful simplicity that gets people killed. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I had spent nearly 2 decades staring down the barrel of corporate implosions, media firestorms, and federal investigations. I wasn't about to lose my composure in front of a woman who thought a balance sheet was the sum total of a company's reality. I just nodded slowly. "I understand," I said. My calmness seemed to unsettle her more than any outburst would have. She expected a fight, a negotiation. She was prepared for emotion. She had no protocol for quiet acceptance. Mark slid a thick folder across the table. The severance package. 18 years distilled into a non-disclosure agreement and a check that felt more like an insult than a golden handshake. They were buying my silence, but they didn't even understand what they were asking me to be silent about. They thought they were just decommissioning an old piece of hardware. They had no idea they were unplugging the emergency generator. As I walked out of that room, I felt the strange lightness of a man who has just been untethered from a great weight. I walked past my office, saw my nameplate still on the door. Vincent Moreau, Director of Crisis Management. Inside, my life's work sat in binders and on hard drives, a legacy of stability. Tomorrow, I thought, and a cold, sharp thrill cut through the numbness. Tomorrow is the annual emergency preparedness drill, the one I had spent the last 6 months designing. Sabrina had been briefed on it, of course, a single line item in a budget review. Q3 Enterprise Resilience Drill. She'd signed off on it without a second thought, assuming, as she told her assistant in an email I was still copied on, that it was Vincent's little fire drill thing. She has no idea. She thinks she's about to test the fire alarms. She doesn't know that at 9 a.m. tomorrow, the entire company is scheduled to have a simulated, full-scale digital heart attack, a high-level cyberattack, complete with fake media inquiries from real and paid journalists, a mock FBI investigation led by a very convincing retired agent I've worked with for years, and a staged stock market crash that will broadcast across every monitor in the building. She fired the one man who knew it was a drill. She fired the one man who had the kill switch. She is about to walk, completely unprepared, into a corporate meltdown of my own meticulous design, and she thinks it's real. A good company shouldn't need a crisis manager. Tomorrow she'll find out just how good a company she's running. If you've ever poured your heart and soul into a job only to be told you're a line item, then you know a little of what I was feeling. Let me know what you think in the comments, and subscribe for more stories like this, because a lesson is about to be taught. The drive home was a blur. The familiar landmarks of my commute, the sprawling industrial park, the patch of woods, the turnoff from my quiet suburban street, they all seemed distant, like objects viewed through the wrong end of a telescope. My mind was a quiet humming void. The shock had frozen everything in place. I pulled into my driveway, the crunch of gravel under the tires the only sound in the world. I sat there for a long time, the engine off, just staring at my own house. It looked solid, permanent. A stark contrast to the life I had just left, which now felt as substantial as a puff of smoke. I didn't go inside right away. Instead, I walked around to the back of the house, to my greenhouse. It was my sanctuary, a glass and steel bubble of controlled, predictable life. Inside, the air was warm and humid, thick with the scent of damp earth and chlorophyll. My collection of bonsai trees sat on tiered benches, each one a miniature world. A long-term project of patience and meticulous care. This was my real crisis management. You can't rush a juniper. You can't streamline a Japanese maple. You can only prune and wire and wait. You respect its nature. You guide its growth. You don't try to turn it into something it's not. I picked up a pair of concave cutters, the steel cool and heavy in my hand. I turned to a Fukian tea tree I'd been working on for a decade. A tiny, almost imperceptible branch was growing inward toward the trunk, disrupting the elegant, windswept line I had spent years cultivating. Snip! The tiny branch fell away. It was a simple, decisive action. Order restored. It was a feeling I hadn't had in the office for a long, long time. My wife, Clara, found me there an hour later. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of concern and something else I couldn't quite place. She didn't say anything at first, just watched me work. She had seen me retreat here after every major crisis, after every trip that took me to a place where something had gone terribly wrong. This was my decompression chamber. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft. "You're home early." I put the cutters down, wiped my hands on a cloth, and turned to face her. I was fired, Clara. I expected surprise, or anger, or pity. I got none of those. Instead, a slow smile spread across her face. It was genuine, reaching her eyes, which crinkled at the corners. "Good," she said. It was the last thing I expected to hear. "Good," I repeated, my voice hollow. "Vincent," she said, walking over and taking my hands. Her hands were warm. "For 18 years I've watched that company suck the life out of you. I've seen you come home looking like you've aged a decade in a day. You've given them your health, your nights, your weekends. You've postponed vacations to clean up their messes. And for what? So some new CEO with a fancy degree can tell you you're a legacy role?" She squeezed my hands. "They didn't deserve you, honey. They never did. This isn't an ending. It's an escape." Her words were a balm. It was as if a dam inside me broke, not with a flood of sorrow, but with a rush of clarity. She was right. I had been a loyal soldier for an empire that had long ago forgotten my name. My loyalty was to an idea of the company, a memory of what it used to be under the old CEO, Peterson. Peterson was a builder. He understood that a company was made of people, not just assets. He's the one who hired me, who saw the value in having someone who could see around corners. I remembered the time about 12 years ago when our primary supplier of microcapacitors in Thailand went dark. A tsunami. No one knew. The news hadn't even broken in the West yet. But I had a system, a network of on-the-ground contacts and weather alerts. I woke Peterson up at 2 a.m. Before our competitors even knew there was a problem, we had rerouted our entire supply chain through a secondary facility in Vietnam. We lost 2 days of production. Our main rival lost 6 months and their biggest client. After it was all over, Peterson called me into his office. He poured 2 glasses of very expensive scotch. He didn't say good job or thank you. He just raised his glass and said, "That, Vincent, is why you're here." We drank in silence. It was a moment of pure, unspoken professional respect. Then I thought about Sabrina. I remembered when she first arrived as a junior VP of strategy. She was ambitious, sharp, but she had no patience for the why. She only cared about the what and the how much. I was tasked with bringing her up to speed on our risk protocols. I'd walk her through a scenario, a sudden political crisis in a country where we had major operations. I'd explain the delicate dance of communicating with the embassy, ensuring employee safety, managing media perception. She'd listen, tapping her pen, and then ask, "But what's the immediate ROI on this protocol? How do we monetize the risk mitigation?" She saw my work not as a shield, but as a product she couldn't sell. I tried to explain. The return on investment for a parachute is zero, Sabrina, until you're in a plane with no engines. She just stared at me, a blank look in her eyes. She didn't get it. She never would. It was then I knew that my time at the company was limited. Competence isn't cheap until you lose it. I had been muttering that phrase to myself for the last 2 years ever since she took over. It had become a mantra of my own obsolescence. As Clara and I stood there in the greenhouse, my phone, which I'd set on a potting bench, buzzed. It was a text. I glanced down. It was from Alex. Alex Chen. He was my protege, a brilliant young analyst I'd hired right out of college 5 years ago. He had the right kind of mind for this work, paranoid, detail-oriented but calm under pressure. He saw the patterns everyone else missed. I'd poured years of experience into him, taught him everything I knew about the architecture of chaos. He was my successor in my mind, at least. The text read, "Vincent, I just heard, what the hell happened? They're saying your position was eliminated. The whole department is in a panic. What do we do?" What do we do? That question. It was the question I was always supposed to have the answer to. I looked at the text, then at Clara's supportive face, then at my perfectly ordered little trees, and something inside me shifted. The resignation, the shock, it all burned away, leaving behind something cold and hard and clear. Resolve. I thought about the drill, the ER7 drill protocol. It wasn't just a plan, it was a work of art, a self-contained, fully automated, high-fidelity simulation of corporate Armageddon. And the key to it all, the one thing that proved it was a drill, was a set of de-escalation codes. Those codes existed in exactly one place, on a small encrypted hardware key, a key that was currently sitting in the top drawer of my desk, at home. Clara was right. This wasn't an ending, it was an escape, but it was also going to be a lesson, a very, very expensive lesson in the value of a good crisis manager. I typed back a simple message to Alex. "Don't do anything, just observe and take notes." He replied almost instantly, "Observe what?" I smiled, a real smile this time. Tomorrow's fire drill. The beauty of a truly complex system is that, from the outside, it looks simple. To Sabrina, the line item ER7 drill protocol $250,000 was just another corporate expense she'd inherited and hadn't gotten around to cutting yet. She probably assumed the cost was for overtime for the security staff and maybe some updated fire safety posters. She would never imagine the intricate, multi-layered machine of chaos that Budget had purchased. She lacked the imagination for it. To her, a drill was a drill. You pull an alarm, people file out, you tick a box for the insurance company. Her world was linear, mine was not. My drills were designed based on a simple principle. You don't rise to the occasion, you sink to the level of your training. For years I had been training our people to handle anything. The ER7 was the final exam, a scenario I had been building towards for 3 years. I called it the Cascade. It was designed to simulate a cascading failure, where one crisis triggers another and another in a relentless, overwhelming wave. Most corporate disasters aren't a single event, they're a chain reaction. The cyberattack is just the first domino. Let me walk you through the architecture of the trap I had laid. 6 months ago, I presented the plan to the executive committee. Peterson was still CEO at the time. He saw the proposal, saw the budget, and his only question was, "Can you make it tougher?" He understood the value of a true stress test. The budget was approved unanimously. Sabrina, then COO, hadn't even bothered to read the full 10-page proposal. I saw her scrolling on her phone during my presentation. Phase 1 was the bait. At precisely 9 a.m., a small, independent white-hat cybersecurity firm I'd contracted, a group of brilliant kids who called themselves CipherTrace, would initiate a simulated breach. It would start subtly. Emails would slow down. The internal network would feel sluggish. IT would assume it was a server issue. This was the normalcy bias phase, designed to test how long it took for the technical team to realize they were facing something more than a routine glitch. Phase 2, at 9:15 a.m., was the escalation. CipherTrace would trigger a piece of mock ransomware. A message would appear on the screens of all senior executives, including Sabrina. It would be a classic, terrifying ransomware note. Your files are encrypted. We have your data. You have 24 hours to pay $10 million in Bitcoin. Of course, nothing was actually encrypted. It was a sophisticated bit of malware that just locked their screens onto that image. But it would look and feel absolutely real. The IT department would be flooded with panicked calls. Their own protocols would tell them to sever the main servers from the external internet, effectively isolating the company and cutting off their own lifeline. My design forced them to follow their own best practices, which in this scenario would only make things worse. While it was scrambling, Phase 3 would begin, the information war. This was my masterpiece. I had hired a small firm that specialized in adversarial simulation. They were actors, many of them former journalists and PR professionals. At 9:30 a.m. they would start making calls. A woman with a crisp, authoritative British accent, playing a reporter from the Financial Times, would call the main switchboard asking for a comment on a rumored data breach. Another, playing a frantic producer from a major news network, would be demanding to speak to the CEO. These weren't just random calls, they were targeted, using names and details that made them sound frighteningly credible. Simultaneously, a network of social media bots that I had paid for would activate. They would start posting on Twitter and LinkedIn mentioning the company by name with fake posts from panicked employees and angry customers. Hashtags would start trending, corporate breach, but company hacked. It would create a digital echo chamber of panic, all visible to the outside world. Then came the real stroke of genius, the part I was most proud of. At 10 a.m., the mock regulatory and legal pressure would begin. My key contact for this was a man named Frank Miller. Frank was a retired FBI agent from the cybercrime division, a gruff, no-nonsense guy I'd worked with on a real case years ago. He now ran a private consulting firm. For a handsome fee, Frank had agreed to reprise his old role. He would arrive at the corporate headquarters, flanked by two very large, very convincing associates, flash a badge that was an exact replica of a real one, and demand to speak to the CEO as part of an active federal investigation into the breach. He wouldn't need to force his way in. Corporate security protocol, which I wrote, dictated that any agent from a federal agency was to be given immediate and unquestioned access to the executive floor. And the grand finale, the psychological blow that would break even the most hardened executive, the stock market. I had commissioned a custom piece of software that would hijack the internal network's data feed to all the monitors in the building, the ones in the lobby, the trading floors, the break rooms. Instead of the real-time NASDAQ feed, it would display a simulated one, a ticker I controlled. Starting at 10:15 a.m., it would show our company's stock, ticker symbol and all, in a free fall, a 10% drop, then 20%, then 40%. It would be a visual representation of the company's value being utterly annihilated in real time. For people like Sabrina, who lived and died by that number, it would be like watching their own blood drain out. The entire system was a Swiss watch of despair, automated and interlinked. Each phase triggered the next. It was unstoppable without the de-escalation sequence, which required 3 separate alphanumeric codes entered in a specific order into 3 different back-end systems within a 60-second window. The codes were on the hardware key in my desk drawer. The only other copy was in a sealed envelope in a safe deposit box at my bank, under the heading, "To be opened in the event of my death or incapacitation." I had, of course, been fired, not incapacitated. A legal gray area I was more than happy to exploit. Before I let this beautiful monster off its leash, I did my due diligence. I had a long call with my lawyer, a sharp, cynical guy named David who specialized in corporate law. I didn't tell him the specifics of the drill, I just framed it as a hypothetical. David, I said, let's say a company has a long-scheduled, pre-approved, and fully funded safety procedure set to run on a specific date, and let's say the employee responsible for overseeing that procedure is terminated the day before. Does that employee have any legal obligation to intervene? David was silent for a moment. I could hear him sipping something, probably coffee. He finally cleared his throat. Was there a clause in your termination agreement about ongoing duties or post-employment transition support? I had the paperwork in front of me. I'd read it a dozen times. No, I said. It's a standard package. NDA, non-compete, a check. It's a clean break. Then legally, he said, you're a private citizen. The moment they walked you out the door, their operational continuity became their problem, not yours. What they do with a pre-scheduled event is on them. In fact, he added, a hint of amusement in his voice, trying to access their systems now that you're no longer an employee could be a criminal offense. They've legally barred you from helping them. He chuckled. Idiots. That was all I needed to hear. My last ethical checkbox was ticked. They had not only fired me, they had legally walled me off from being able to stop the train that was about to hit them. It wasn't revenge, it was a physics problem, it was cause and effect. Arrogance was the cause, the cascade would be the effect. I spent the rest of the evening in my greenhouse, meticulously wiring the branches of a new black pine. My phone was off, my mind was quiet. The world outside my little glass sanctuary could take care of itself for one more night. Tomorrow, all hell would break loose, and I would be in my garden, tending to my trees, a silent God watching his creation unfold. The morning of the drill dawned bright and clear, a perfect, calm autumn day. I was up at sunrise as usual. Clara made coffee, and we sat on the back porch, watching the light filter through the trees. She didn't ask about my plans. She knew me well enough to see the quiet, steely resolve in my eyes. She just gave my hand a squeeze and said, "Try to enjoy your day off." I took her advice. I put on my old gardening clothes and went to work on a stubborn patch of weeds that had been encroaching on the rose bushes. There was a simple, grounding satisfaction in it, pulling chaos out by the roots, forcing order onto a small patch of the universe. I refused to check the time. I refused to think about what was happening miles away in that gleaming tower of corporate ambition. At what I guessed was around 9:05 a.m., I couldn't resist any longer. I went inside, washed my hands, and picked up my phone. I turned it on. The screen lit up, and for a moment, it struggled to keep up. A deluge of notifications flooded in. Dozens of text messages, all from Alex. They came in a rapid-fire sequence, a real-time diary of a nervous system shutting down. 8:59 a.m. Okay, I'm at my desk. It's quiet. Too quiet. 9:02 a.m. Network is slow. People are already complaining. IT sent out a mass email, experiencing minor latency issues. Our team is investigating. They have no idea. 9:16 a.m. Holy, it's here. The ransomware screen. It's on Sabrina's monitor. I can see it from my desk. She's just staring at it. Her face is white. 9:18 a.m. She's screaming. Not loud, but that sharp, high-pitched kind of scream. She's yelling at her assistant to get IT in here now. 9:25 a.m. Lead just came out of her office. He looks like he's seen a ghost. He's telling his team to take the external servers offline. They're doing it. They're cutting us off. Just like the protocol said they would. I smiled. The machine was working perfectly. The first domino had fallen exactly as planned, and it had knocked over the second one right on cue. My boys at CipherTrace were earning their fee. I walked back outside, phone in hand, and sat on the porch steps. The texts kept coming, a staccato rhythm of panic. 9:31 a.m., the phones are going insane. Switchboard is lit up like a Christmas tree. I heard the receptionist telling someone, "No ma'am, I cannot comment on a rumored data breach." She sounds terrified. They're using the scripts you wrote for the media training. 9:40 a.m. Oh God, Vincent. Someone just sent a link to a fake news article in the department chat. It's on a site that looks exactly like Forbes. Company name halts operations amid massive cyberattack. Stock plummets in pre-market. It looks so real. 9:45 a.m. Sabrina has her entire leadership team in the glass conference room, the one where she fired you. She's pacing, waving her hands. You can see the panic. She's trying to leverage synergies and circle the wagons while the whole ship is sinking. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like a scientist observing an experiment. I had created this ecosystem of chaos, and it was behaving exactly as predicted. Her MBA jargon, her buzzwords, her talk of streamlining, it was all useless noise in the face of a genuine, albeit simulated, crisis. She was a captain who had thrown her navigator overboard, and now she was sailing blind into a hurricane of her own making. Then came the text I was waiting for. 10:02 a.m. You are not going to believe this. Frank Miller is here, the FBI guy. He just walked into the lobby with two guys who look like they eat bricks for breakfast. Security just waved them through. He's heading for the elevator to the exec floor. This is insane. I could picture it perfectly. Frank in his slightly too tight suit with his air of weary authority. He wouldn't have to raise his voice. He would just exude an aura of federal power that would melt any resistance from a corporate security guard. He would get to Sabrina's office, and he wouldn't ask to come in. He would just enter. He'd tell her he was running a national security investigation and that her company was a crime scene. He'd demand access to everything, her phone, her computer, her files, and she would give it to him, because what else could she do? The final phase was about to begin, the one that would hit her where she lived. 10:16 a.m., the monitors. Vincent, the monitors in the lobby. The stock ticker, it's a bloodbath. It says we're down 40%. People are stopping and staring. Someone is crying. They think we're going under. They think it's all gone. That was it, the psychological kill shot. In her world, that ticker was reality. It was the ultimate measure of her success or failure, and it was telling her, and the entire world, that she had failed on a catastrophic scale. For the first time all day, I felt a pang of something. Not guilt. Not exactly. It was more like awe. Awe at the sheer power of a well-designed system. I had built a fiction so powerful it had overwhelmed their reality. They weren't fighting a hacker anymore. They were fighting a story. And it was a story they couldn't control. I put my phone down and went back to my weeds. The sun was warm on my back. The birds were singing. In the distance, I could hear a lawnmower. It was a perfectly normal, peaceful day. I had never felt more powerful in my entire life. Sabrina thought a good company didn't need a crisis manager. She was about to learn that a bad one can't survive without one. The first inkling that the simulation was starting to fray at the edges, that reality was beginning to bleed back in, came around noon. Alex sent a new text. 12:05 p.m. Something shifting. The head of IT, a guy named Ben, just ran out of the server room. He was shouting, "It's not real. None of it is real. I think you found something in the code, a signature from CipherTrace or something you left." I had anticipated this. Ben was good, the best they had. I knew he'd eventually find the breadcrumbs I'd left deep in the system logs. It was part of the design. The drill wasn't meant to last forever. It was meant to last long enough to teach a lesson. The point wasn't to destroy the company, but to hold up a mirror and show them what they had become. 12:15 p.m. Ben is in the conference room with Sabrina. He's pointing at a laptop. She's shaking her head. She doesn't believe him, or she doesn't want to. Frank Miller is still in her office, stonewalling her. This is a mess. And then, the moment of dawning horror. 12:22 p.m. She knows. Ben must have shown her the project approval form, the one you submitted, with her signature on it, the name ER7 Drill Protocol. She just stormed out of the conference room. She looked right at me. She knows I've been talking to you. Her face, Vincent, I've never seen a look like that. The game had changed. It was no longer a simulation of a crisis. It was a real one. A crisis of leadership, of trust, of competence. A crisis of her own making. My phone rang. The screen displayed her name, Sabrina Wells. I let it ring. I watched the screen, the name pulsing with a frantic energy. It rang and rang, a shrill, desperate sound in the quiet of my house. Finally, it went to voicemail. A moment later, a notification popped up, a new message. I tapped it, put the phone to my ear. Her voice was a ragged, breathless thing, stripped of all its corporate polish. "Vincent," she hissed, the sound distorted by her panic. "Call it off, right now. This isn't funny. You've made your point. You need to stop this. It's too realistic. People are panicking. You have to stop it. There was a pause, and then the threat, the desperate lashing out of a cornered animal. If you don't, so help me, I will bring the full force of this company's legal team down on you. You will be ruined. I deleted the message. Her threats were empty. My lawyer had already confirmed my position. I was a private citizen. More importantly, she had just admitted she had lost control. She was begging the man she fired a day earlier to save her. The power dynamic had been completely inverted. Then the second, more profound phase of the fallout began. It wasn't about the simulation anymore. It was about the people. Alex texted me again. 1 p.m. I just walked out. I quit. I went to her office, told her I couldn't work for a leader who was so willfully blind. She didn't even try to stop me. She just stared. Maria from legal and the entire core server team from IT just walked out behind me. We're done, Vincent. The whole place is a ghost ship. This was the part of the cascade Sabrina could never have understood. It wasn't about systems or protocols. It was about loyalty. Not loyalty to a brand or a logo, but to competence, to respect. The people who actually made the company run, the ones who knew where the metaphorical bodies were buried, their loyalty was to the mission, not the management. And Sabrina had proven she was incapable of leading that mission. They weren't leaving for more money or a better title. They were abandoning a failed state. I thought of the phrase I'd been repeating to myself for months: competence isn't cheap until you lose it. In the span of a few hours, Sabrina had managed to vaporize decades of institutional knowledge. She'd cut the cost of my salary, but the expense she had just incurred would be orders of magnitude higher. She had asset stripped the company of its most valuable resource, its people. The exodus was the true power shift. My drill had simply been the catalyst, the black light that revealed the cracks that were already there. The company wasn't failing because of a fake cyberattack. It was failing because it was structurally unsound. It was a house of cards, and Sabrina had just pulled out the one card that was holding it all together, me. And now the people who knew how to rebuild it were walking out the door behind me. My phone rang again. It wasn't Sabrina. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Vincent," a calm, familiar voice said. It was David, my lawyer. "I just got a very panicked call from the general counsel at your old company. He was threatening a temporary restraining order. I told him to go ahead and file it. By the time a judge hears it, the drill, as he called it, will be long over." He paused, then he started to laugh, a deep, genuine laugh. He said, and I quote, "You don't understand, he built a doomsday machine and gave the launch codes to a toddler. Vincent, what in God's name did you do?" "I just built a mirror, David," I said. "It's not my fault they don't like what they see." He was still chuckling when he hung up. The power shift was complete. They had no leverage, no control, no plan. All they had was the mess they had made, and the one man who knew how to clean it up was at home, enjoying his first day of unemployment. The afternoon settled into a strange, tense quiet. The barrage of text from Alex had stopped, replaced by a single final message. "We're at the bar across the street. First round is on me. Let me know what's next." The "we" was significant. It was the core of my old team, the institutional memory of the company, now gathered in a pub plotting their future, my future. I spent the next few hours in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The drill was scheduled to automatically de-escalate at 3 p.m. The ransomware screens would vanish, replaced by a simple message: "This has been the ER7 Emergency Preparedness Drill. Thank you for your participation." The stock ticker would revert to the real-time feed. Frank Miller would thank Sabrina for her cooperation and see himself out. The chaos would recede as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind a wrecking yard of broken trust and exposed incompetence. At 3:30 p.m., my phone rang for a third time. I didn't recognize the number, but it was a local area code. I answered, my voice calm. "Vincent Moreau." "Vincent, it's Howard Peterson." The voice of the old CEO, the man who had hired me, was a sound from a different era. He sounded tired, but there was an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place. Not anger, respect, maybe even amusement. "Howard," I said, keeping my tone level. "I trust you're having an interesting day." "That's one word for it," he said, a dry chuckle rumbling down the line. I just got off an emergency call with the board of directors. Most of them were calling from their cars, having fled the building in a panic. It was quite the scene. I stayed silent. I knew this wasn't a social call. Sabrina Wells has been relieved of her duties, effective immediately, he said, the words clean and sharp. The board has terminated her contract for cause gross mismanagement. So the mirror worked, I said. He sighed. Vincent, I saw your proposal for this drill 6 months ago. I knew exactly what the ER7 was. I knew it was a full-spectrum stress test. When Sabrina told me last month she was planning on streamlining your department, I warned her. I told her she was mistaking a pillar for a decoration. She didn't listen. So you let it happen, I realized. You let her walk right into it. Let's just say, he said carefully, that I believed in the integrity of your drill. I believed it would accurately measure the resilience of our current leadership. It appears I was correct. The board agrees. The pieces clicked into place. Peterson had used my drill as a weapon. He had seen Sabrina's incompetence, her arrogance, and he knew she would eventually fly the company into a mountain. My drill just gave him the black box data to prove it to the rest of the board. The conversation shifted. We need you to come back, Vincent. The board has authorized me to make you a significant offer, Chief Operating Officer, and a substantial equity stake. Name your price. We need you to fix this. It was the ultimate vindication. The job I was never even considered for, the power I never sought being handed to me on a silver platter. The prodigal son welcomed back to save the kingdom, and I felt nothing, no surge of triumph, no desire to return to that glass tower. Howard, I said, and for the first time I felt a genuine sense of peace. I appreciate the offer, I truly do, but I'm not interested in coming back. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, recalculating. But Vincent, the company is in chaos. We've had dozens of resignations today, critical staff. I know, I said. They're at a bar across the street, and I think they're waiting for me. I'm starting my own firm, Howard, a specialized consultancy in crisis management and enterprise resilience. Another silence. Longer this time. I could picture him, a man used to getting his way, realizing he had just been checkmated. A consultancy, he repeated slowly. Yes, I said. My team and I will be available for hire, to help companies assess their real-world vulnerabilities, to help them build robust systems, to teach them the difference between a real asset and a line on a spreadsheet. I see, he said. And I suppose your first client would be you. I finished for him. If you're interested, of course my consulting rates are significant, especially for an emergency engagement. I'm no longer a salaried employee, Howard. I'm an outside expert, and expertise, as we've all learned today, is not cheap. He was quiet for a moment longer. Then I heard it again, that dry, rumbling chuckle. You always were 3 moves ahead, Vincent. All right, have your lawyer draw up a proposal. Send it to me tonight. Welcome aboard, I guess. We hung up. The final confrontation hadn't been a shouting match with Sabrina. It was a calm, quiet business negotiation where my value was no longer a matter for debate. It was a quantifiable, premium-priced fact. I hadn't just gotten my job back. I had transcended it. I was no longer the company's immune system. I was the surgeon they had to call in, at great expense, after they had deliberately infected themselves. The new workplace reality had been established, not by a memo, but by a meticulously executed demonstration of consequence. My new office isn't on the top floor of a skyscraper. It's a modest, functional space in a renovated brick building downtown with large windows that let in the morning light. The loudest sound isn't the hum of 100 cubicles, but the quiet tapping of keyboards and the occasional burst of laughter from the conference room. My name is on the door not as a director of a department, but as a founder. Moreau Resilience Group. My team is here. Alex, who now heads up our analytics division, is at a whiteboard with Maria from the old legal department mapping out a risk matrix for our first big client. The server team I poached, or rather the team that followed me out the door, is building out a secure, state-of-the-art network in a back room. They're not just employees, they're partners. We're building something new on our own terms. Our first client, of course, is my old company. Peterson agreed to my terms without a single change. My hourly rate is, to put it mildly, astronomical. I am now being paid more in a week than I used to make in 3 months, all to teach them the lessons I once offered for free. The irony is a constant, quiet source of satisfaction. Sabrina, I heard, is gone, not just from the company, but from the industry. The story of the ER-7 drill, in a heavily redacted and anonymized form, became a legendary case study at a business school. They call it the competence cascade. She became a ghost, a cautionary tale for arrogant MBAs everywhere. She thought a crisis manager was a cost, a relic of a reactive past. She learned the hard way that a crisis manager is an investment, and that the absence of one creates an expense that no spreadsheet can calculate. And that's the real moral of this story. It's not about revenge. Revenge is an emotional, messy thing. This was about something cleaner. It was about value. For 18 years, my value was invisible. It was the fire that didn't happen, the scandal that didn't break, the collapse that was averted. It's hard to put a number on the absence of disaster, so they decided its value was zero. They think loyalty is a line item on a budget. They believe experience is a liability that can be replaced by a younger, cheaper model. They forget that trust, institutional knowledge, and genuine competence are the real infrastructure of any successful enterprise. It's not the chrome and glass, it's the quiet, unseen foundation holding it all up, and when you crack that foundation, the whole gleaming tower comes crashing down. So I'm speaking to you now, to anyone who has ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or erased in their job, to anyone who has poured their life's work into something only to be told they are a legacy cost. Your value is not determined by their spreadsheet. Your worth is not defined by their ignorance. Competence is a form of power, the most potent kind there is. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise. Build your skills, cultivate your relationships, and always, always know your own worth, because a day may come when you are the only one who knows how to stop the drill, and on that day you get to set the price. If you've ever been in a situation like this where your expertise was dismissed, share your story in the comments below. I read them all. And if you want to hear more about how competence always wins in the end, make sure you like this video and hit that subscribe button, because in the world of business, as in life, you either pay for experience or you pay for the lack of it. There is no third option.